The wind howling through the mountain pass sounded like the wail of a dying man, and Adelaide Pierce knew with chilling certainty that if the stagecoach did not find shelter soon, they would all freeze to death before morning. She pressed her gloved hands against the frosted window, peering through the accumulated ice at the swirling white chaos beyond. The December storm had descended upon them with shocking speed as they traveled through the Sierra Nevada mountains, transforming what should have been a routine journey from Sacramento to Yuba City, California, into a nightmare. It was 1881, and Adelaide had been returning home after visiting her ailing aunt in the capital city, never imagining that winter would arrive with such ferocious intensity. The stagecoach lurched violently to the right, and Adelaide gasped as she was thrown against the elderly woman seated beside her. Mrs. Thornton, a widow traveling to visit her son, clutched Adelaide's arm with surprising strength for someone of her advanced years. "We have stopped moving, Mrs. Thornton whispered, her voice trembling with more than just the cold. Adelaide realized the woman was right. The violent rocking and swaying had ceased, replaced by an eerie stillness punctuated only by the shrieking wind. Across from them, a traveling salesman named Mr. Garrett pulled aside the leather curtain and tried to open the door. It would not budge. "We are stuck," he announced, his face pale in the dim light filtering through the ice-covered windows. "Buried, I think." The fourth passenger, a young man barely out of his teens who had introduced himself as Thomas, began to panic. "We will suffocate. We will freeze. We are going to die out here. Calm yourself," Adelaide commanded, her voice sharp despite her own rising fear. At 23 years old, she had learned to project confidence even when terror threatened to overwhelm her. "Panic will not help us," she called out to the driver and guard riding on top of the coach, but received no response. Either they could not hear her over the wind, or something worse had befallen them. Adelaide refused to let herself dwell on that possibility. The temperature inside the stagecoach was dropping rapidly. Adelaide could see her breath forming thick clouds in the air before her face. She had dressed warmly for the journey in a wool traveling dress and heavy cloak, but already the cold was seeping through the layers, settling into her bones with malicious intent. "How long can we survive like this?" Mr. Garrett asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. "Long enough to be found," Adelaide insisted, though she had no idea if that was true. They had been traveling through a remote section of the mountain pass when the storm hit. Even if someone came looking for them, how would rescuers ever locate one buried stagecoach in this vast white wilderness? Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The passengers huddled together for warmth, sharing what blankets and supplies they had. Mrs. Thornton began to doze fitfully, her breathing becoming shallow and labored. Thomas had finally stopped his hysterical outbursts, lapsing instead into a sullen, frightened silence. Mr. Garrett periodically attempted to force open the door, but the snow packed against it held firm. Adelaide kept herself awake by thinking of her parents, waiting for her in Yuba City. Her father ran a prosperous dry goods store, and her mother was known throughout the community for her charitable works. They would be frantic with worry when the stagecoach failed to arrive. Adelaide imagined her mother's face, drawn with concern, and felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them away fiercely. She would see her parents again. She had to believe that. The air inside the coach was growing stale and thin. Adelaide noticed she was becoming light-headed, and Mrs. Thornton's breathing had become even more labored. They were running out of time. Then, incredibly, she heard something. A sound that did not belong to the storm, a rhythmic scraping that seemed to come from outside the coach. Adelaide pressed her ear against the frozen wood panel. "Listen," she hissed to the others. "Do you hear that?" They all fell silent, straining to catch the sound. Yes, there it was again. Someone was digging. "Help!" Adelaide screamed, pounding on the side of the coach with her fists. "We are in here. Help us!" The others joined in, shouting and banging until the coach rang with the cacophony. The scraping sound grew louder, more purposeful, and then suddenly light blazed through a crack near the top of the door. Fresh, bitterly cold air rushed in, and Adelaide gulped it gratefully despite the way it burned her lungs. "Hold on in there," a deep male voice called through the opening. "I am going to get you out." Adelaide felt hope surge through her chest for the first time in hours. Someone had found them. They were going to survive. The digging continued with steady determination. Whoever their rescuer was, he worked with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The crack widened, allowing more light and air into the coach's interior. Adelaide could see that evening had fallen, and the storm seemed to have lessened somewhat, though snow still fell in thick, heavy flakes. Finally, with a groan of protest, the door swung open. A man stood silhouetted against the white landscape, tall and broad-shouldered, covered in snow from his wide-brimmed hat to his boots. He leaned into the coach, his eyes quickly assessing the situation. "Is anyone badly hurt?" he asked. "Mrs. Thornton is unwell," Adelaide said quickly. "She needs warmth and rest immediately." The man nodded and reached for the elderly woman with gentle, capable hands. "Come on, madam. Let me help you." He lifted Mrs. Thornton from the coach as though she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. "There is a line station about half a mile from here," he told the remaining passengers. "Follow my tracks in the snow. Stay close together and keep moving. I will come back for anyone who cannot make it on their own." He disappeared into the swirling white, carrying Mrs. Thornton toward safety. Mr. Garrett climbed out next, then helped Thomas down. Adelaide gathered her small traveling bag and prepared to follow. As she emerged from the stagecoach, the full reality of their situation became clear. The coach had slid off the road and become wedged against an outcropping of rock, nearly completely buried by the massive snowdrifts. The driver and guard were gone, their seats empty. Adelaide sent up a silent prayer that they had managed to reach safety before the worst of the storm hit. She turned to look in the direction their rescuer had gone and saw his tracks, already beginning to fill with fresh snow. Mr. Garrett and Thomas had started following them, struggling through the deep drifts. Adelaide took a deep breath and plunged after them, lifting her heavy skirts as best she could. The journey to the station was a waking nightmare. The snow came up past her knees in places, and the wind tore at her cloak with invisible hands. Her feet quickly went numb despite her sturdy boots, and her lungs ached from breathing the frigid air. She kept her eyes fixed on Thomas's back ahead of her, terrified of losing sight of him in the white chaos. When she finally stumbled through the door of the line station, she nearly collapsed with relief. The interior was blessedly warm, heated by a roaring fire in a large stone fireplace. Mrs. Thornton lay on a cot near the fire, covered with multiple blankets. Their rescuer was crouched beside her, holding a cup of something hot to her lips. "Drink slowly, madam," he was saying in that same calm, steady voice Adelaide had heard at the coach. "Just a little at a time." Adelaide found herself staring at him, really seeing him for the first time. He was perhaps 27 or 28 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly where it brushed his collar, and a strong, featured face marked by days spent in harsh weather. His eyes, when he glanced up and met her gaze, were an unusual shade of gray-green, like the sage that grew wild in the valleys below the mountains. "You should get closer to the fire," he told her. "You are shaking." Adelaide realized he was right. Her entire body was trembling with cold and delayed shock. She moved woodenly toward the fire, stripping off her wet gloves with fingers that barely functioned. The line station was a simple structure, just one large room with a few cots, a table and chairs, and supplies stored along the walls. It existed to provide shelter and fresh horses for stagecoach travelers, though clearly it saw infrequent use given its remote location. "How did you find us?" Mr. Garrett asked the question Adelaide was wondering herself. Their rescuer straightened from tending to Mrs. Thornton. "I was heading down from my claim when the storm hit. I took shelter here and was settling in when I heard your coach go past. When I did not hear it pass the station, I knew something had gone wrong. Took me a while to find you in all that snow, but I kept searching until I did." "You went out in that storm looking for us?" Adelaide asked, incredulous. "You could have died." He shrugged, a slight smile touching his lips. "Could not very well leave folks to freeze when I might be able to help." "We owe you our lives," Mrs. Thornton said weakly from her cot. "What is your name, young man?" "Isaac Oliver, madam," he replied. "I have a mining claim about 5 miles up the mountain. Been working it for near about 3 years now. A miner." Adelaide studied him with renewed interest. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that she found oddly compelling. Most of the miners she had encountered in California were rough, desperate men chasing dreams of gold that would never materialize. Isaac Oliver seemed different somehow, more grounded and practical. "I am Adelaide Pierce," she said, finding her voice. "From Yuba City. These are Mr. Garrett Thomas and Mrs. Thornton." Isaac nodded to each of them in turn. "Pleased to meet you all, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He moved about the station with easy familiarity, stoking the fire and preparing hot coffee for everyone. Adelaide accepted a tin cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around it to absorb its warmth. "What about the driver and guard?" Thomas asked nervously. "Should we not look for them?" "I found sign that they struck out on foot before the worst hit," Isaac said. "Their tracks led toward the station down the line, about 3 miles back the way you came. They likely made it there before the storm got too bad." Adelaide felt relief wash through her at that news. She had been trying not to think about what might have happened to the 2 men. "How long will we need to stay here?" Mr. Garrett asked. Isaac moved to the window and peered out at the continuing snowfall. "Storm should blow itself out by morning, I reckon. After that, we will need to wait for the snow to settle some before trying to make it down to the valley. 2, maybe 3 days. 3 days trapped in this tiny station with 4 strangers." Adelaide supposed there were worse fates. At least they were alive and relatively safe, thanks to Isaac Oliver's courage and determination. As the evening wore on, they settled into an uneasy routine. Isaac prepared a simple meal from the station's supplies, a stew made with dried beef and potatoes that tasted like the finest restaurant fare to Adelaide's famished body. They ate in relative silence, exhaustion and shock still weighing heavily on all of them. Mrs. Thornton dozed by the fire, her color slowly returning. Thomas and Mr. Garrett claimed 2 of the cots and were soon snoring loudly. Adelaide found herself wide awake despite her exhaustion, her nerves still jangling from the ordeal. Isaac was checking the fire, adding more wood to ensure it would burn through the night. Adelaide rose from her chair and moved to stand beside him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did, for coming out in that storm and finding us." He glanced at her, and in the firelight his eyes seemed to glow with an inner warmth. "No need for thanks. Any decent person would have done the same." "I am not certain that is true," Adelaide replied. "Many people would have stayed safe and warm and told themselves there was nothing they could do." Isaac was quiet for a moment, his gaze returning to the fire. My father died in a mining accident when I was 16, he said finally. Collapsed tunnel. 3 other men were trapped with him. A group of miners from a neighboring claim risked their own lives to dig them out. They saved 2 men that day. My father was not one of them, but at least he did not die alone in the dark. At least we got to bury him proper. That meant something to my mother and me. I guess I have never forgotten what those men did, going into danger to help folks they barely knew. Adelaide felt her throat tighten with emotion. I am sorry about your father. It was a long time ago, Isaac said, but she could hear the old grief still echoing in his voice. He taught me to work hard and treat people right. I try to honor that. He would be proud of you, Adelaide said softly. Isaac smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. I hope so. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind howl outside. Adelaide found herself intensely aware of Isaac's presence beside her, the solid warmth of him, the quiet strength he exuded. She had been courted by several young men in Yuba City, sons of merchants and professionals who were considered good matches for a woman of her standing. None of them had ever made her feel the way she felt standing next to this miner in a lonely mountain station. You should try to get some rest, Isaac said eventually. I will keep watch and make sure the fire stays going. You need sleep as much as any of us, Adelaide protested. You were the one out in that storm digging us out. I am used to hard work and little sleep, Isaac assured her. Mining will do that to a man. Besides, someone needs to stay awake in case the storm worsens or we have other trouble. Adelaide wanted to argue further, but she could see the determination in his face. Instead, she nodded and moved to the remaining empty cot. She lay down fully clothed, pulling a rough wool blanket over herself, and tried to sleep. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive. She found her mind replaying the terrifying hours trapped in the stagecoach, the crushing fear that she would never see her home or family again. And then Isaac's face appearing in the doorway, snow-covered and determined, offering salvation. She wondered what he thought about, sitting alone by the fire in the deep hours of the night. She wondered if he was as aware of her as she was of him. When Adelaide finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with swirling snow and gray-green eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. She woke to pale morning light filtering through the station's small windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie silence broken only by the crackling of the fire. Adelaide sat up, disoriented for a moment, then remembered where she was. Isaac was still by the fire, though he had moved to one of the wooden chairs. His head was tipped back against the wall, his eyes closed, but he stirred as soon as Adelaide rose from the cot. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "You stayed up all night," Adelaide said accusingly. "Dozed some in the chair," he replied, though she suspected he was downplaying his exhaustion. "Coffee is still hot if you want some." Adelaide poured herself a cup and moved to the window. What she saw made her gasp. Snow covered everything as far as she could see, transforming the landscape into an otherworldly expanse of white. The drifts were piled higher than a man's head in places, and the trees bowed under the weight of accumulated snow. "I have never seen so much snow," she breathed. Isaac came to stand beside her, assessing the scene with experienced eyes. "Must have gotten near 3 feet in some places. Good thing we found shelter when we did." The others began to wake, and Isaac prepared breakfast from the station's supplies, Johnny cakes and bacon that filled the small space with mouth-watering aromas. As they ate, they discussed their situation. "I need to get to Yuba City," Adelaide said. "My parents will be beside themselves with worry." "We all have places we need to be," Mr. Garrett agreed. "When can we leave?" Isaac considered the question carefully. The main road will be impassable for at least another day, maybe two. The snow needs time to settle, and we will need to wait for a brake crew to come through and clear a path. 2 more days, Thomas groaned. I am supposed to start a new job in Sacramento. Better late than dead, Isaac pointed out reasonably. Besides, there is not much choice in the matter. Nature does not care about our schedules. Adelaide found herself watching Isaac as he spoke, noting the way he commanded attention without seeming to try, the calm authority in his voice. He was clearly a man used to handling difficult situations on his own. She wondered what it would be like to have someone like that as a partner in life, someone steady and capable you could rely on no matter what challenges arose. The thought startled her with its intensity. She barely knew this man. It was absurd to be thinking about him in such terms. And yet, she could not deny the pull she felt toward him, a connection that went beyond simple gratitude for her rescue. The day passed slowly. They were all getting restless from confinement in the small space, though no one was foolish enough to venture out into the deep snow. Isaac kept them entertained with stories from his mining experiences, and Adelaide found herself laughing at his dry humor and self-deprecating tales of mishaps and near disasters. You would think after 3 years I would know better than to store my blasting powder next to my cook stove, he said, recounting one particularly harrowing incident. But there I was, cold and tired after a long day, not thinking straight. Lucky for me, I knocked over the powder tin before I lit the stove, found it rolling around on the floor and realized what I had almost done, would have blown myself and half the mountain to kingdom come. How do you stand it? Adelaide asked. The loneliness, I mean. Living up here by yourself, working alone day after day. Isaac was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. It can be lonely sometimes, he admitted. But there is also a kind of peace in it. When you are working a claim, it is just you and the mountain. No politics, no pretense, no worrying about what other folks think. Just honest work and the hope that the next swing of the pick will reveal something worthwhile. Have you found much gold? Mr. Garrett asked, his eyes lighting with interest. Enough to keep me fed and supplied, Isaac said carefully. Not enough to make me rich, but I am not in it for that anymore. Started out thinking I would strike it big like everyone does, but after a while you realize it is not about the gold. It is about the work itself, about testing yourself against something hard and unforgiving and finding out what you are really made of. Adelaide understood what he meant on a level that surprised her. She had spent her whole life in the comfortable, predictable world of Yuba City society, following the rules and expectations laid out for a young woman of her class. She had never truly tested herself, never pushed beyond the boundaries of what was safe and known. Part of her envied Isaac his freedom, his willingness to chase something difficult and uncertain rather than settling for easy security. That evening, after the others had gone to bed, Adelaide once again found herself alone with Isaac by the fire. She had been thinking all day about their earlier conversation, about loneliness and purpose, and the choices people made in their lives. You ever regret it? She asked him. Coming out here, spending your best years working a claim that may never pay off. Isaac considered the question seriously, as he seemed to consider everything. Sometimes, he said honestly, especially on the cold nights when the wind is howling and I am eating beans straight from the can for the 3rd night running. There are easier ways to live, I reckon. But Adelaide prompted, sensing there was more. But I chose this, Isaac said simply. It is my life built by my own hands and decisions. There is value in that, in knowing you are living according to your own lights rather than someone else's expectations. Does that make sense? More than you might think, Adelaide replied. She hesitated, then continued. Sometimes I feel like my whole life has been planned out for me. I am expected to marry well, have children, involve myself in charitable works and social functions. There is nothing wrong with any of that, but sometimes I wonder what else might be possible. What other versions of myself might exist if I had the courage to reach for them? Isaac was looking at her intently, and Adelaide felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had never spoken so openly to anyone, certainly not to a man she had known for barely a day. "What would you do?" Isaac asked. "If you could choose any life," Adelaide laughed softly. "I do not even know. That is the problem. I have never let myself truly imagine it." She paused, thinking. "I love books. I have always thought I might like to teach, to help children discover the worlds that open up through reading. But my parents expect me to make a good marriage, and teaching is not considered appropriate for a married woman of means." "Seems to me you should get to make that choice for yourself," Isaac said. "Not your parents, not society, you." "You make it sound so simple," Adelaide said wistfully. "Never said it was simple," Isaac replied, "just that it should be your choice." They talked long into the night, sharing stories and dreams and pieces of themselves they rarely showed to others. Adelaide learned that Isaac had a younger sister who had married a farmer and now lived in Oregon with her husband and 3 children. He sent money when he could and visited once a year. She learned that he loved reading too, that he had a small collection of books in his cabin that he had read and reread until he knew whole passages by heart. In turn, Adelaide told him about growing up in Yuba City, about her close relationship with her mother and her sometimes strained one with her father, who wanted her to marry the son of his business partner. She told him about her late brother, who had died of fever when Adelaide was 12, and how his death had changed everything in her family. By the time they finally sought their beds in the early morning hours, Adelaide felt as though she had known Isaac Oliver for years rather than a single day. There was an ease between them that she had never experienced with anyone else, a sense of being truly seen and understood. The next day dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. Isaac announced that he would need to check on his cabin and supplies, make sure everything had weathered the storm. "I will be back before nightfall," he promised. "There is plenty of wood and food. Keep the fire going and stay inside." Adelaide felt an unexpected pang of worry as she watched him prepare to leave. "Be careful," she said, and was embarrassed by how much emotion leaked into her voice. Isaac met her eyes and smiled. "I will, I promise." He was gone for most of the day, and Adelaide found herself counting the hours until his return. She tried to occupy herself with conversation and helping Mrs. Thornton, who was recovering well from her ordeal, but her thoughts kept drifting to Isaac making his way through the snow to his isolated cabin. When he finally returned as the sun was setting, Adelaide felt relief flood through her so powerfully that her knees went weak. Isaac was laden with supplies, including several books that he offered to share. "Thought we could use some entertainment," he said, handing Adelaide a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. That evening, Adelaide read aloud while the others listened. Even Mr. Garrett and Thomas, who had seemed like unlikely poetry appreciators, appeared moved by the beauty of the language. Isaac sat slightly apart from the group, his eyes on Adelaide as she read, and she found herself performing for him, putting extra feeling into the words about love and longing and the human heart's deepest desires. The third day brought welcome news. A brake crew from down the valley had made it through during the night and had the road mostly cleared. They could leave by afternoon. Adelaide should have been overjoyed. She would finally get home to her worried parents, back to the safety and comfort of her normal life. Instead, She felt a deep sadness settling over her. Once they left this station, once she returned to Yuba City and Isaac to his mountain claim, when would she ever see him again? As the others packed their few belongings and prepared for departure, Adelaide found a moment alone with Isaac outside the station. The sun was bright on the snow, making everything sparkle like diamonds. "I want to thank you again," she said, her words feeling inadequate. "Not just for saving our lives, but for these past few days. For the conversations and the kindness. It has meant more to me than I can properly express." "It has meant a lot to me too," Isaac said quietly. "Meeting you, Adelaide, it has been something special." They stood looking at each other, and Adelaide felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on her chest. She wanted to tell him that she had never met anyone who made her feel the way he did, that the thought of never seeing him again felt like a physical pain. But the words stuck in her throat, too bold and improper to speak aloud. "Perhaps you might visit Yuba City sometime," she ventured instead. "My family would want to thank you properly for what you did." "Perhaps I will," Isaac said, but they both knew how unlikely that was. What business would a mountain miner have in a valley town? Their worlds had intersected for this brief moment, but now they would diverge again, following their separate paths. The stagecoach line had sent a wagon to collect the stranded passengers. The driver helped Mrs. Thornton aboard, then Mr. Garrett and Thomas. Adelaide was the last to go. She turned back to look at Isaac one more time, memorizing his face, the way the winter sun brought out red highlights in his dark hair, the gray-green of his eyes that reminded her of sage and storms. "Goodbye, Isaac Oliver," she said softly. "Goodbye, Adelaide Pierce," he replied. "I hope you find whatever you are looking for." The ride down to Yuba City passed in a blur. Adelaide stared out the window at the snow-covered landscape, her mind full of Isaac and his quiet strength, his thoughtful words, the way he had made her feel seen and valued in a way no one else ever had. When she finally arrived home, her parents nearly smothered her with embraces and tears of relief and joy. Her mother fussed over her, insisting she eat and rest, while her father proclaimed that she should never travel anywhere alone again. The world was clearly far too dangerous. Adelaide let them care for her, but part of her remained distant, still back in that mountain station with a miner who had risked his life for strangers, and who had listened to her dreams without judgment or mockery. In the days that followed, Adelaide tried to settle back into her old life. She attended church socials and tea parties, smiled politely at the attentions of Mr. Harold Kempton, her father's business partner's son, and helped her mother with charity work. But everything felt hollow now, a play she was acting in rather than a life she was truly living. She could not stop thinking about Isaac. She wondered what he was doing up on his mountain, whether he thought of her, whether those 3 days had meant as much to him as they had to her. She found herself walking to the edge of town, looking up at the distant mountains and trying to guess which peak might hide his claim. Her mother noticed her distraction. "You have been different since you came home," she said one afternoon as they sat together sewing. "I know the accident must have been terrifying, but it seems like something more is troubling you." Adelaide set down her needlework and looked at her mother. They had always been close, and she suddenly desperately needed to confide in someone. "The man who saved us," she began slowly. "Isaac Oliver. He was remarkable, Mother. He risked his life to dig us out, and then he took care of all of us, kept us safe and warm. And we talked, really talked, about things I have never discussed with anyone. He made me feel like my thoughts and dreams mattered, like I could be more than just someone's wife or someone's mother." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. "You have feelings for him," she said finally. It was not a question. "Yes," Adelaide whispered. "Is that foolish? I barely know him." "The heart is rarely logical," her mother replied gently. "But Adelaide, you must be practical as well. What kind of life could you have with a minor? The hardship, the isolation, the uncertainty." "I know," Adelaide said miserably. "I know all of that, but I cannot seem to make myself care. When I am with Harold Kempton, all I can think about is how boring he is compared to Isaac, how shallow and predictable our conversations are. Harold talks about profit margins and property values. Isaac talked about books and choices, and what it means to live authentically. How can I settle for less now that I know more is possible?" Her mother reached over and took Adelaide's hand. "Then do not settle. Your father will not like it, but I will help you. Life is too short to spend it with the wrong person, living someone else's dream instead of your own." Adelaide felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you, Mother. That means everything." But knowing she should not marry Harold was not the same as knowing what she should do. Isaac had never indicated that he had similar feelings for her. Yes, they had connected deeply during those days at the station. But perhaps for him it had simply been a pleasant way to pass the time until they could all get back to their regular lives. She had no way of knowing, and the conventions of society prevented her from reaching out to him directly. A proper young woman did not pursue a man, certainly not a near stranger who lived alone on a mountain. The weeks passed. Winter deepened its hold on the valley. Adelaide declined Harold's increasingly insistent invitations and hints about his intentions, much to her father's frustration. She threw herself into teaching reading to children at the church, finding some solace in sharing her love of books with eager young minds. Then, on a bright February morning, everything changed. Adelaide was helping her father in the store, tallying inventory in the storeroom when she heard her mother's voice from the front, raised in pleased surprise. "Why, Mr. Oliver, what a wonderful surprise! Adelaide, come here, please." Adelaide froze, certain she must have misheard. But then she heard it again, her mother calling her name, and underneath it, a familiar deep voice that made her heart leap into her throat. She emerged from the storeroom, and there he was. Isaac Oliver, standing in her father's store, holding his hat in his hands and looking somehow both confident and uncertain at once. He had cleaned up since she had last seen him, his hair neatly trimmed, his clothes respectable if well worn. But his eyes were the same, that striking gray-green that she had seen in her dreams every night since they parted. "Hello, Adelaide," he said, and the way he said her name made her feel warm all over. "Isaac," she managed. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see you," he said simply. "If that is all right." Adelaide was aware of her mother watching them with undisguised interest, of customers in the store turning to stare. She did not care. "That is more than all right," she said. "That is wonderful." Her father emerged from the back office, looking between Isaac and Adelaide with confusion. "Who is this man?" "This is Isaac Oliver," Adelaide's mother explained. "The miner who saved Adelaide and the other passengers during the snowstorm, the one we owe such a debt to." Understanding dawned on her father's face, followed by the kind of effusive gratitude that made Adelaide cringe slightly. But Isaac handled it with grace, accepting her father's thanks with quiet humility. "It is nothing any decent person would not have done," he insisted. "I am just glad everyone made it out safely." "You must let us thank you properly," Adelaide's father insisted. "Come to dinner tonight. We want to hear the whole story." Isaac glanced at Adelaide, and she saw the question in his eyes. She nodded eagerly, and he smiled. "I would be honored," he said. Dinner that night was simultaneously the best and most nerve-wracking evening of Adelaide's life. Isaac charmed her parents with his honesty and straightforward manner, telling the story of the rescue without embellishment or false modesty. Her mother clearly approved of him, drawing him out with questions about his life and experiences. Even her father, who Adelaide had expected to look down on a mere miner, seemed impressed by Isaac's intelligence and work ethic. After dinner, Adelaide's mother suggested that Adelaide show Isaac the garden, which was really just an excuse to give them time alone together. They walked in the cool evening air, their breath forming clouds between them. "I need to tell you something," Isaac said abruptly. "I need you to know why I came here." Adelaide's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "All right. After you left, I tried to go back to my regular life. I worked my claim, read my books, did all the things I had always done, but nothing felt right anymore. I kept thinking about you, about our conversations, about the way you looked reading poetry by firelight, and I realized something." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I realized that I had spent 3 years on that mountain convincing myself I wanted to be alone, that I was living some noble existence of solitude and self-reliance. But the truth is, I was hiding. I was afraid of wanting more, afraid of needing people and being disappointed. And then you came into my life, and suddenly hiding seemed like the most foolish thing I could possibly do." Adelaide could barely breathe. "Isaac, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you, Adelaide Pierce," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it is fast. I know we have only spent a handful of days together, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You make me want to be brave enough to want things, to build a real life instead of just existing day to day. If there is any chance you might feel the same way, I had to come here and tell you. I had to know." Tears were streaming down Adelaide's face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "I do feel the same way. I have been miserable since I left you, Isaac. I tried to go back to my old life, but it all felt empty and meaningless. You made me feel alive in a way I never had before. You made me believe I could be more than what everyone expected me to be." Isaac stepped closer, reaching up to gently wipe the tears from her cheeks. "I do not have much to offer you. My claim brings in enough to live on, but we would never be wealthy. The life would be hard sometimes, isolated. I could not ask you to give up everything you know here." "You are not asking," Adelaide said firmly. "I am choosing. I choose you, Isaac. I choose a life that is real and true, even if it is hard sometimes. That is worth more than all the comfort and security in the world." "Are you certain?" Isaac asked, his eyes searching hers. "Because once you say yes, I am never letting you go, you need to be sure, Adelaide." "I have never been more sure of anything," she promised. Isaac pulled her into his arms then, holding her close against his chest, and Adelaide felt like she had finally come home. They stood there in the garden as the stars came out overhead. Two people who had found each other against all odds and were brave enough to reach for something real. Of course, her father had concerns. When Isaac formally asked for Adelaide's hand in marriage the next day, her father pointed out all the very reasonable objections to such a match. The hardship of life in the mountains, Adelaide's lack of preparation for such an existence, the uncertainty of a miner's income, the isolation from family and friends. But Adelaide's mother sided with her daughter, and together they gradually won her father over. What finally convinced him was seeing the way Isaac and Adelaide looked at each other, the obvious depth of feeling between them. He might have wanted Adelaide to marry Harold Kempton and live a safe, predictable life in Yuba City, but he loved his daughter enough to want her to be truly happy. "You promise you will take care of her?" he asked Isaac gruffly. "You will keep her safe and provide for her?" "I promise I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of her," Isaac replied, "and I will love her with everything I have." It was enough. They were married in late March, when the snow was beginning to melt from the high country, and the valley was bursting with spring wildflowers. It was a simple ceremony at the church, with Adelaide's family and a few close friends in attendance. Adelaide wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slighter frame, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Isaac wore a new suit purchased for the occasion, though Adelaide thought he had never looked more handsome than he did in that moment. His eyes locked on hers as they spoke their vows. After the ceremony, there was a modest celebration at her parents' house. But Adelaide was eager to begin her new life, and Isaac was just as eager to show her the home he had prepared for her. He had sold his mining claim, he told her as they rode up into the mountains in a wagon loaded with Adelaide's belongings and supplies for their new life. He had gotten a good price for it, enough to buy a small ranch in a valley about 10 miles from Yuba City. It was not completely isolated, but it was far enough from town to offer the peace and independence Isaac valued. He had spent the past weeks building additions to the existing cabin, making it into a proper home for a married couple. When Adelaide saw it for the first time, she felt her eyes fill with tears. Isaac had clearly put enormous effort into making the place welcoming. The cabin was sturdy and well built, with a large main room, a separate bedroom, and even a small room that he told her shyly could be a study for her books or a nursery when the time came. He had built shelves along one wall and filled them with books, a combination of his own small collection and new volumes he had purchased in Sacramento. "I know it is not fancy," he said anxiously, "not like what you are used to in town." "It is perfect," Adelaide breathed. "It is absolutely perfect." Their first year of marriage was an adjustment, as all first years must be. Adelaide had to learn how to cook on a wood stove, how to preserve food for winter, how to manage the dozens of practical tasks that came with running a household in a rural area. Some days were harder than others, and there were moments when she felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work involved in their daily lives. But through it all, Isaac was there beside her, patient and supportive and endlessly loving. He taught her what he knew and learned alongside her when they encountered challenges neither of them had faced before. They worked the small ranch together, raising chickens and a few head of cattle, putting in a vegetable garden that Adelaide tended with pride. In the evenings, they would sit together and read aloud to each other, or talk about their days, or simply enjoy the comfortable silence that comes when two people are perfectly at ease in each other's company. Adelaide visited her parents regularly, and they came to the ranch often as well. Her mother was delighted to see Adelaide so happy, and even her father had to admit that Isaac had been true to his word, providing for Adelaide and clearly cherishing her. Over time, her father came to genuinely like and respect his son-in-law, appreciating Isaac's integrity and work ethic. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. She and Isaac were overjoyed, though also somewhat nervous about becoming parents. Isaac threw himself into preparing for the baby's arrival, building a beautiful cradle and making sure they had everything they would need. Their son was born on a warm September evening, with Adelaide's mother and the local midwife in attendance. He was healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him James, after Isaac's late father, and Adelaide thought she had never seen anything more beautiful than Isaac holding his newborn son, his face transformed by wonder and love. Life settled into a new rhythm after James arrived. Adelaide discovered that she loved being a mother, though it was more challenging than she had imagined. But Isaac was a devoted father, taking on his share of the nighttime feedings and diaper changes, walking the floor with James when he was colicky, singing silly songs to make him laugh. When James was 2, Adelaide started a small school on their property. She taught reading and basic arithmetic, to children from the surrounding farms and ranches, fulfilling her dream of becoming a teacher while still managing her duties as a wife and mother. Isaac built a small schoolhouse for her on their land, and parents from miles around brought their children to learn from Mrs. Adelaide Oliver, who was known for her patience and passion for education. 3 years after James, Adelaide gave birth to twin daughters, Eleanor and Grace. The girls were a whirlwind of energy and mischief from the moment they could walk, keeping both parents constantly on their toes. But the house that had seemed so large when Adelaide first saw it now felt perfectly sized, filled with laughter and love and the wonderful chaos of children. As the years passed, Adelaide and Isaac built a life that was exactly what they had both dreamed of, though neither of them could have articulated that dream until they found each other. It was a life built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, where both of them contributed their strengths and supported each other through weaknesses. It was a life filled with hard work but also with joy, with challenges but also with deep satisfaction. On their 10th anniversary, Isaac took Adelaide back to the line station where they had spent those fateful 3 days during the snowstorm. The building was still standing, though it saw less use now that the railroad had come through the valley. They walked through the single room, remembering, and Adelaide felt overcome with emotion thinking about how much had changed since that desperate, frightening time. "I think about that storm sometimes," Isaac said, putting his arm around her. "About how if I had made a different choice, if I had decided to wait out the storm rather than going to look for your coach, we might never have met." "I think we would have found each other somehow," Adelaide said. "Some things are just meant to be. You really believe that?" Isaac asked, smiling down at her. "I do," Adelaide said firmly. "We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. Every day I wake up grateful for that storm, as terrible as it was, because it brought me to you." Isaac kissed her then, slow and sweet, and Adelaide thought about how lucky she was to have found a love that was as deep and constant as the mountains around them, as enduring as the seasons that turned year after year. Their children grew up strong and happy, educated by their mother and taught practical skills by their father. James showed an aptitude for ranching and animal husbandry, while Eleanor loved books as much as her mother and eventually became a teacher herself. Grace surprised everyone by developing a passion for mechanics and engineering, fascinated by the new machinery that was beginning to transform agriculture in California. Adelaide's school grew over the years, gaining a reputation throughout the region. She taught hundreds of children, many of whom went on to college and professional careers they never would have dreamed of without her encouragement and instruction. Several of her former students came back as adults to thank her for opening up worlds of possibility to them, and those moments never failed to bring tears to her eyes. Isaac expanded their ranch gradually, always careful not to overextend, building slowly and steadily. He became known in the region as a man of his word, someone you could count on to deal fairly and honor his commitments. He served on the local school board and helped organize a lending library for the community, using his own books as the foundation of the collection. As Adelaide and Isaac grew older, they watched with pride as their children married and started families of their own. James took over management of the ranch, running it with the same careful stewardship his father had taught him. Eleanor opened a school in Yuba City, carrying on her mother's legacy. Grace moved to San Francisco to work for an engineering firm, one of the first women they had ever employed, breaking new ground with characteristic determination. Adelaide's parents lived long enough to see their grandchildren grown and to meet several of their great-grandchildren. On her deathbed, Adelaide's mother took her daughter's hand and told her how proud she was, How right Adelaide had been to follow her heart all those years ago. "You and Isaac have built something beautiful," she whispered. "A real partnership, a real family. That is all any parent could want for their child." Isaac's hair turned silver as the decades passed, and Adelaide's face showed the lines of years lived fully and well. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love in a snowbound mountain station, who had been brave enough to reach for something real and true. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a huge celebration. There was food and music and laughter, and Adelaide felt so full of joy she thought her heart might burst. As the party wound down and the younger grandchildren were put to bed, Adelaide and Isaac slipped away to their favorite spot, a bench Isaac had built years ago on a small rise that overlooked their property. They sat together in the gathering dusk, holding hands and watching the lights come on in the various buildings scattered across what had become quite a substantial ranch. In the distance, they could see Yuba City, grown much larger over the years but still recognizable as the town where Adelaide had grown up. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked, echoing Adelaide's question from that first night at the station. "Choosing this life, choosing me." Adelaide laughed and squeezed his hand. "Not for a single second. This has been the most wonderful adventure, Isaac. I would choose you again and again in every lifetime." "I love you, Adelaide Oliver," Isaac said, just as he had said countless times over their 50 years together. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And I love you," Adelaide replied. "My brave cowboy who dug me out of the snow and gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out overhead, two old people who had found each other young and built something lasting and true. Their love had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, had deepened and matured over decades of shared joys and sorrows. It was a love story that had started with a desperate rescue in a snowstorm, and had grown into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. Years later, when Isaac passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Adelaide held his hand and told him one last time how much she loved him, how grateful she was for their life together. She knew he could hear her even if he could not respond, knew their connection transcended even the boundary between life and death. Adelaide lived another 3 years after Isaac's passing, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who adored her. She spent her remaining time writing down the stories of her life, wanting future generations to know how their family had begun, to understand the courage and love that had founded the life they all enjoyed. She wrote about the snowstorm and the stagecoach, about Isaac appearing like a guardian angel in the midst of disaster. She wrote about their wedding and their children, about the challenges they had faced and overcome together. She wrote about the deep, abiding love that had sustained them through 53 years of marriage, a love that had only grown stronger with time. When Adelaide died in her sleep one spring morning, her granddaughter Eleanor found her with a peaceful smile on her face, and the worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets that Isaac had brought to the line station all those years ago open on her lap. Inside the front cover, in Isaac's strong handwriting, was an inscription that Eleanor had never noticed before. It read, "For Adelaide, who was worth risking everything for, all my love always, Isaac." Eleanor wept as she read those words, understanding in that moment the depth of what her grandparents had shared. Their love story became a legend in the family, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of courage and connection, and choosing to reach for something real even when it seemed impossible. The ranch remained in the family, as did Adelaide's school building, which was eventually converted into a small museum dedicated to the history of education in the region. The story of the cowboy and the woman trapped in the snow became a part of local folklore, inspiring countless young people to believe in the possibility of finding true love against all odds. And somewhere in the mountains above Yuba City, if you know where to look, you can still find the old line station where two souls found each other during a winter storm in 1881. The building is weathered and worn now, nearly swallowed by the wilderness, but those who visit say there is something special about the place, a feeling of hope and possibility that lingers in the air like a blessing. It is the place where Adelaide Pierce and Isaac Oliver's story began, where a desperate situation became the foundation for a love that would span more than half a century. It is a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best outcomes, that courage and kindness can change everything, and that true love, when you are brave enough to reach for it, can transform not just two lives but generations to come. Their story lived on in the hearts of all who knew it, a testament to the enduring power of love and the extraordinary things that can happen when two people choose each other against all odds. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West itself, wild and beautiful and true, forged in adversity and tempered by time into something precious and lasting. And in the end, that is what mattered most. Not the gold that Isaac never found in the mountains, not the comfortable society life Adelaide left behind, but the life they built together, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. A life filled with love and purpose and meaning, a life that echoed down through the generations, inspiring others to be brave enough to follow their hearts no matter where they might lead. It was a happy ending, but more than that, it was a happy life, and that made all the difference.